"Poor people are poor because they're lazy and make bad choices," typed Madison Wells from her penthouse apartment, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her rose gold iPhone. "If they just worked harder and managed money better, they wouldn't be poor." The comment was posted under a news article about rising poverty rates, and within minutes it had dozens of angry responses. But one reply stood out from the rest. "Easy to say when you've never lived paycheck to paycheck. I challenge you to live my life for 30 days and see how easy it is." The response came from user .workingmomlife, whose profile showed a tired-looking woman in a grocery store uniform. Madison laughed as she read it, sipping her $15 green juice while overlooking Central Park from her family's $8 million apartment. At 19, she had never worked a day in her life. Her father, Richard Wells, owned a chain of luxury hotels, and Madison's biggest worry was deciding which designer dress to wear to charity galas. "Challenge accepted," she typed back mockingly. "But when I prove how easy it is, you have to admit that poor people just don't try hard enough." What Madison didn't expect was for her comment to go viral. Within 24 hours, the exchange had been shared thousands of times, with people demanding she actually follow through on her words. News outlets picked up the story, calling it "Rich Girl's Poverty Challenge." The pressure became so intense that Madison's father was forced to address it during a business meeting. "This is embarrassing our family," Richard said coldly. "Your thoughtless comments are affecting our company's reputation. Maybe it's time you learned what the real world is actually like." "You can't be serious," Madison protested. "I'm not actually going to live like a poor person." "Actually, you are," her father replied firmly. "Consider it part of your education before you inherit any family business responsibilities." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Sarah Martinez was scrubbing floors at a downtown office building, trying to forget about the rich girl whose comments had made her so angry. At 34, Sarah worked 3 jobs: cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day, and babysitting on weekends, just to support herself and her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah lived in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, where the heat barely worked in winter and the air conditioning never worked in summer. Every month was a careful calculation of which bills could be paid and which would have to wait. Despite working 70 hours a week, she never seemed to get ahead. "Mom, why did that rich lady say we don't work hard?" Emma asked one evening as they shared a dinner of mac and cheese. Again. "Some people don't understand what it's like to struggle, baby," Sarah explained, trying to keep the bitterness out of her voice. "They think money grows on trees." The next day, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. "Ms. Martinez? This is Jennifer from Channel 7 News. We're calling about your viral exchange with Madison Wells. We'd like to propose something unprecedented, a real life swap. You would live her life for 30 days, and she would live yours." Sarah almost hung up, thinking it was a prank. "That's impossible. Rich people don't actually want to live like us." "Ms. Wells's family has agreed to the arrangement," Jennifer continued. "You would stay in her apartment, have access to her resources, and experience her lifestyle. Meanwhile, she would live in your apartment, work your jobs, and survive on your income." "And what's the catch?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "No catch. Everything would be documented for a reality series, but you'd both receive $50,000 at the end regardless of the outcome." Sarah's mind raced. $50,000 would pay off her debts, cover Emma's medical bills from her asthma treatments, and maybe even allow her to go back to school to finish her nursing degree. But could she really trust these wealthy people to keep their word? "I need time to think about it," she said. That night, as Emma coughed through another asthma attack because Sarah couldn't afford the better medication, she made her decision. The experiment began on a Monday morning in October. Sarah stood outside Madison's luxury apartment building, feeling completely out of place in her second-hand clothes as the doorman eyed her suspiciously. Meanwhile, Madison arrived at Sarah's building in the Bronx, her designer luggage looking absurd against the backdrop of the rundown exterior and broken elevator. "This can't be legal," Madison muttered, as she climbed 4 flights of stairs to reach the apartment. When she opened the door, her jaw dropped. The entire apartment was smaller than her walk-in closet. The first week was brutal for both women, but in completely different ways. Madison's first shock came when she tried to turn on the heat and nothing happened. The landlord informed her that heat was only provided between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. during winter months, and even then, it barely worked. "How is this legal?" she demanded over the phone to her father. "Welcome to reality for millions of Americans," he replied curtly. "Figure it out." Madison's second shock came when she reported to Sarah's first job at 5 a.m. The grocery store manager, Mr. Rodriguez, handed her a uniform and put her to work immediately. "Stock these shelves before we open at 6, he said, pointing to dozens of heavy boxes, "and make sure everything is perfectly aligned. Customers complain if products aren't straight." Madison had never done physical labor in her life. Within an hour, her back ached, her hands were raw, and she was exhausted. But the worst part was how she was treated by both management and customers. "Move faster!" Mr. Rodriguez snapped when he saw her struggling. "We don't pay you to take breaks." "I'm going as fast as I can," Madison protested. "Then you're not fast enough. Sarah could stock twice as much in half the time." Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing culture shock of a different kind. Madison's apartment was bigger than most houses, with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and more space than Sarah knew what to do with. But the real difference wasn't the luxury. It was the time. For the first time in years, Sarah wasn't worried about money, wasn't calculating every expense, wasn't working multiple jobs. She could simply exist without the constant anxiety of survival. "Is this how rich people live every day?" she wondered aloud, standing in the massive kitchen. "Never worrying about whether they can afford groceries or rent?" Sarah decided to use her temporary wealth responsibly. She researched charities, visited museums she'd never been able to afford, and for the first time since Emma was born, she had time to read books and think about her dreams. Back in the Bronx, Madison was learning harsh lessons about poverty. After her first day at the grocery store, she came home exhausted and tried to order takeout, only to discover that Sarah's food budget was $40 per week. "$40?" she said into her phone, calling her father. "That's what I spend on lunch." "That's what Sarah spends on groceries for herself and her daughter for an entire week," her father replied. "Figure out how to make it work." Madison's education in poverty continued when she tried to do laundry and discovered that the building's washing machine was broken and had been for months. She had to walk 6 blocks to a laundromat, carrying heavy bags of clothes, and spend precious money she couldn't afford on washing and drying. "This is insane," she complained to the camera crew following her. "How do people live like this?" But the real wake-up call came when Madison tried to take Emma to the doctor for her asthma. Sarah had left detailed instructions about Emma's care, including a note that her inhaler prescription needed refilling. At the pharmacy, Madison was told that the medication would cost $180. "But she needs it to breathe," Madison protested. "I understand, but without better insurance, that's the price," the pharmacist said sympathetically. "Some parents try to make inhalers last longer by using them less frequently." Madison stared at the pharmacist in horror. "You're saying parents let their children struggle to breathe because they can't afford medication?" "It happens more than you'd think." For the first time since the experiment began, Madison used her own money to pay for Emma's medication. As she walked home carrying the inhaler, she began to understand the impossible choices poor parents faced every day. Meanwhile, Sarah was learning about wealth in ways she never expected. It wasn't just about having money, it was about having options. When Sarah's temporary housekeeper mentioned her son needed school supplies, Sarah could simply buy them without thinking about the cost. When she saw a homeless woman outside the building, she could give her $100 without worrying about paying rent. Money isn't just about buying things, Sarah realized during one of her filmed interviews. It's about freedom from fear. Fear of getting sick, fear of not making rent, fear of your children going without things they need. The second week brought new challenges for both women. Madison was supposed to work Sarah's second job, cleaning offices at night, but she struggled with the physical demands and the loneliness of working while the rest of the world slept. "I don't understand how Sarah does this," Madison admitted to the camera, tears streaming down her face as she scrubbed toilets at 2 a.m. "She works all day at the grocery store, then comes here and cleans until dawn, then goes home to take care of her daughter. When does she sleep? When does she rest?" The answer, Madison was learning, was that Sarah didn't rest. Poverty meant constant work, constant worry, and constant exhaustion. But Madison's biggest lesson came when Emma got sick with a fever in the middle of the night. Madison panicked, not knowing what to do or where to take her. She called 911, but when the ambulance arrived and she mentioned Sarah's insurance, she was told that the emergency room visit could cost thousands of dollars. What would Sarah do? Madison asked herself, holding the feverish little girl. She spent the night giving Emma fever reducers and cool baths, calling a nurse hotline every hour for guidance, too afraid to seek professional help because of the potential cost. It was the longest, most terrifying night of her life. Meanwhile, Sarah was attending charity galas and business meetings, seeing how the wealthy made decisions that affected thousands of people. She sat in board meetings where executives discussed layoffs and wage cuts as if they were talking about the weather. "Do you ever think about the families affected by these decisions?" she asked during one meeting. The executives looked at her strangely. "We have to consider shareholder profits," one explained. "Personal circumstances aren't really relevant to business decisions." Sarah began to understand how the wealthy could be so disconnected from the reality of poverty. They lived in a bubble where poor people were abstract concepts rather than real human beings with real struggles. By the third week, both women were changing in fundamental ways. Madison had lost weight from the physical labor and stress. She had learned to cook simple meals with cheap ingredients, to stretch every dollar, and to appreciate small luxuries like hot water and warm blankets. More importantly, she had developed genuine affection for Emma and real respect for Sarah's strength and resilience. "I don't know how she does it," Madison told the camera. "Sarah works harder than anyone I've ever met. She's raising a daughter, working 3 jobs, and still finds energy to help her neighbors and volunteer at Emma's school. She's not lazy, she's superhuman." Sarah, meanwhile, was using her temporary privilege to make a difference. She had donated thousands of dollars to local charities, tutored children at Emma's school, and started planning a foundation to help working mothers get education and job training. Having money isn't just about personal comfort, she realized. It's about having the power to help others and create change. The final week brought both women face to face with their biggest challenges yet. Madison had to figure out how to pay all of Sarah's bills on Sarah's income: rent, utilities, groceries, Emma's school expenses, and medical costs. Even working all 3 jobs, the numbers didn't add up. "There's no way to make this work," Madison cried, surrounded by bills and receipts. Even if Sarah never bought anything for herself, never went anywhere, never did anything fun, she still can't afford basic necessities for her and Emma. For the first time, Madison truly understood what poverty meant. It wasn't about being lazy or making bad choices. It was about a system where full-time work didn't pay enough to cover basic living expenses. Sarah faced her own moment of truth when she attended a board meeting at her father's company and learned they were considering closing a plant that employed 500 people. "What about those families?" she asked. "What are they supposed to do?" "Find other jobs," Richard Wells replied dismissively. "That's not our responsibility." "It absolutely is your responsibility," Sarah shot back, surprising everyone in the room. "You can't make decisions that destroy people's lives and then pretend it's not your problem." The confrontation led to a heated argument where Sarah accused the wealthy executives of treating poor people like disposable objects rather than human beings deserving of dignity and respect. On the final day of the experiment, Madison and Sarah met back at Madison's apartment to switch lives back. Both women were exhausted, emotional, and fundamentally changed by their experiences. "I owe you an apology," Madison said immediately. "Everything I said about poor people was wrong. You're not lazy. You work harder than anyone should have to work. The system is broken, not the people." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "And I learned that having money comes with responsibilities. If you have the power to help people and you don't use it, you're part of the problem." The reunion was emotional, with both women crying as they shared their experiences. Emma, who had been staying with Sarah's sister during the final day, ran to both women, having bonded with Madison during their month together. "Madison taught me how to make pancakes," Emma told her mother excitedly. "And she bought me new books and paid for my inhaler when I couldn't breathe good." Sarah looked at Madison with new respect. "You took care of my daughter." "She took care of me too," Madison replied. "She taught me what really matters." The documentary aired 6 months later and became a cultural phenomenon. Both women appeared on talk shows, spoke at conferences, and became advocates for economic justice and understanding between social classes. Madison used her inheritance to start a foundation providing healthcare, childcare, and education support for working families. She also convinced her father to implement living wages and comprehensive benefits for all hotel employees. "The experience taught me that poverty isn't a moral failing," Madison explained during a television interview. "It's a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. We can't keep blaming individuals for problems created by inequality." Sarah used her $50,000 payment, plus additional donations from viewers, to finish nursing school and start a clinic providing affordable health care in low-income neighborhoods. She also became a spokesperson for working mothers' rights and fair wage legislation. "Living Madison's life showed me what's possible when you don't have to choose between rent and medicine," Sarah said. "Every family deserves that kind of security." The most significant change came in the relationship between the two women. They remained close friends, with Madison becoming like an aunt to Emma, and Sarah serving as Madison's advisor on social justice initiatives. "The experiment was supposed to prove that poor people are lazy," Madison reflected a year later. "Instead, it proved that rich people are often ignorant. Sarah didn't need to learn how to work harder. I needed to learn how to see clearly." Most importantly, their story had inspired others to examine their own assumptions about wealth, poverty, and human worth. Schools showed the documentary to teach empathy and understanding. Politicians referenced their experience when discussing economic policy. Families used their story to talk about privilege and responsibility. Emma, now 13, often spoke at events with both women. "My mom and Madison taught me that the most important thing isn't how much money you have," she would say. "It's what you do with what you've been given and how you treat other people." The experiment that began as a cruel social media joke had evolved into a powerful demonstration of human capacity for growth, understanding, and compassion. It proved that when people truly experience each other's lives, prejudice dissolves and genuine connection becomes possible. But perhaps the most important lesson was the simplest one. Everyone deserves dignity, respect, and the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their economic circumstances. True wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the positive impact we have on each other's lives. The greatest poverty is not the lack of money, but the lack of understanding between people. When we truly see each other's struggles and strengths, we discover that the distance between rich and poor is much smaller than the distance between ignorance and compassion. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful true stories, and share this video to remind the world that compassion can change lives. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment below. What have you learned from your current situation?